pleasure to be with you this evening. Did any of you go to the March for Life in Washington? Here they had a good crowd. Didn't see anybody could know about it because they didn't show the pictures here. And they never do. In fact, in Washington itself, in the news and in the papers, they wouldn't show the pictures. This is part of the thing. But those who went know you're not alone. And it's called the March of the Young. Because overwhelmingly young people. I just mentioned Mr. Reilly. The year he graduated from high school was the year of the first march. It was in January 22nd, 1974. We helped organize the first march. We contacted a woman called Nellie Gray. She was in Washington, and Dr. Ada Ryan knew of her. Why did we go there? Well, you're living in New York State. And in New York State, they legalized abortion in 1970. We fought to repeal it, and we did in 1972 by 11 votes. And the governor, Governor Rockefeller at the time, he vetoed the repeal. And we didn't have enough to overturn the veto. And so in 1973, the Supreme Court ruled that it was unconstitutional for any state to restrict abortions. And so we had to go to Washington, D.C. And we went, and actually the march wasn't a march. First gathering in Washington, D.C. was in front of the Capitol building. And it was 15,000 of us for the first time. And Senator James Buckley, who was William F. Buckley's brother, was one of the keynote speakers, and the other was Dr. Ada Ryan. And they spoke from the steps of the Capitol building. And the march actually was, we walked on the sidewalk around the Capitol building, all 15,000 of us. And that's how it started. Today, you know, it's a great march. But the difficulty, of course, is that if you're not there, you don't even know it took place. Because they totally block it out. It's interesting. There was a priest called Father Chisek, Father Walter Chisek. He was a Jesuit father, and he wanted to go to Russia, to bring God to Russia. That was always his desire, to bring God to Russia. And he did. But shortly after he arrived, he was arrested as a Vatican spy. And he was put into prison. He was sent to the gulags. And he actually was there about 35 years. And they don't know how he survived. Because all they could receive in the morning was a little bit of gruel, some gruel if it was, and that was it for the day. They had to wait till the next morning to receive anything. And most people died. And so what they would do is, in the prison, sometimes people would sneak into the prison bread and wine. Bread and wine. And the word would go forth, bread and wine. Now, he went into prison, as most people, before Vatican II. And before Vatican II, if you were going to receive Holy Communion, you could not have a drop of water from midnight the night before. That was it. Now, the different Eucharistic fasts that they have, but not then. And the prisoners still did not know about Vatican II. And they thought that if you're going to receive the Eucharist, you could not take a drop of water from midnight before. And so when the word went forth that there was bread and wine was taken into the prison, no one would take anything, even that little gruel in the morning. It would end up that they'd have to fast from everything for 48 hours. And then they'd have a lunch break, but not for lunch. It was just a break from work. And when they would do that, the bread and wine was smuggled into the camps. They'd put it on a cut trunk of a tree. And then Father Chisek, from memory, would say the Eucharistic prayer in Latin, and he would consecrate the bread and wine at the risk of his life. At the risk of his life. And what would happen is the prisoners would come over one by one, not making a fanfare, and receive the Eucharist at the risk of their lives. And they'd have to fast for 48 hours. Nothing. Father Chisholm said to me, probably the greatest masses I ever offered, identifying with the Passion of Christ, what it was really about, was in the gulags, in the prisons. And then he finally lived through the 35 years. He didn't die. I don't know how. He didn't die. And he was free. And he was bringing God to Russia. Bringing God to Russia. And he was offering what's called the Easter Vigil. You know, it starts like on Saturday night, goes into Sunday. He was offering the Easter Vigil, and the word went forth. The word went forth. There's a priest, the Eucharist. And people would walk all through the night to come to that Mass. He said, I was giving out the Eucharist, started in the evening, to 9 o'clock the next morning. People were still coming, walking miles and miles and miles. Really? It's interesting. See, in Russia, they tried to crush the church, and crush God, called atheism. They were not successful. People resisted. People went to prison. People died. And they couldn't win. And they turned the churches into department stores. Into department stores. I remember I was in Kiev, Ukraine, and there was two doctors helped start to help us in Ukraine. And one was a convert. She was a convert in 1992. And I was in this church, and she said, you know, Father, I was baptized next to heaven. I said, what do you mean, next to heaven? She said, I was baptized in this church. And it was the church that Pope John Paul II had just got there a month before me. I said, what do you mean? She said, well, this was a department store when we first got it back. And they put the baptistry on the 4th floor. And she said, I was baptized here on the 4th floor near heaven. She said, near heaven. Now nothing's changed. But what happened is, in the Eastern Bloc countries, the people suffered, they died, and they could not wait to change the churches back into churches and empty out these department stores from their churches. Well, if you know anything now, you know that in the Eastern countries, they are getting back their churches. And they're emptying out the churches. I remember I was going through Bratislava, Slovakia. Bratislava is a city in Slovakia. We were having a prayer vigil going through the city at night. And as we were going through the night, I saw all these young people kneeling in the street. And later I said, what was that? All those young people kneeling in the street. He said, oh, Father, there wasn't any more room in the church. Any more room in the church. Kneeling in the street. They have their churches back. So what the communists actually tried to crush God, but they did not succeed. They did not succeed. Because if you know anything now, life is receiving tremendous support. In Hungary, they just changed the constitution. In Hungary now, the country of Hungary, actually they put into the constitution, life will be protected in Hungary from the first moment of conception unto natural death. In the new Hungarian constitution. And they put into the constitution, only a marriage between a man and a woman will be accepted in Hungary and no other type. Hungary. In Poland, the parliament has overwhelmingly voted there will be no more abortions in Poland allowed. In Russia, you can't have an abortion every 12 weeks unless your husband's going to jail. And they also now demand, signed by the president of Russia, that if you advertise for an abortion in Hungary, you have to put down that this is a dangerous medical procedure for the woman. Russia. And then you come to the United States. In New York, as you know, when the law was passed in 1970, you are able to have an abortion in New York State up to the